Marcus Chen adjusted his tie for the third time as he stood before the gleaming glass towers of Preston Industries. The morning sun reflected off the building's surface, creating a wall of light that seemed to mock his hesitation. In his briefcase lay credentials that could secure him any position he wanted, yet his heart hammered with the weight of what he was about to do. He pulled out his phone and stared at the photo on his lock screen. Emma, his 6-year-old daughter, beamed back at him with gap-toothed joy, her small arms wrapped around a stuffed elephant nearly as big as herself. The image had been taken just 3 days ago when he'd surprised her with early pickup from daycare. The pure delight in her eyes when she saw him waiting by the playground had made every sacrifice worth it. Today, he would deliberately fail this interview. Not because he couldn't handle the work, but because success might mean losing the most precious thing in his world. The lobby buzzed with corporate energy as Marcus entered. Men and women in sharp suits moved with purpose, their conversations filled with quarterly projections and strategic initiatives. Once, he had been one of them. Dr. Marcus Chen, aerospace engineer, with 3 patents and a MIT doctorate that had opened doors across the industry. That man felt like a stranger now. The receptionist smiled politely as he announced himself. Within minutes, he was riding the elevator to the 20th floor, watching the city shrink below. Each ascending number reminded him of how far he had climbed before, and how willingly he was about to fall. The Preston Industries executive floor exuded power and precision. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city sprawling endlessly, while abstract art pieces adorned walls that whispered of million-dollar deals. Marcus was led through corridors lined with awards and accolades until they reached a conference room where his fate would be decided. Sarah Chen entered with the confidence of someone who had earned her position through merit, not politics. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine but assessing. As vice president of operations, she had built her reputation on spotting talent that others missed. Today, she would interview candidates for a senior project coordinator role, a position that seemed almost insulting for someone of Marcus's background. "Good morning, Mr. Chen," she said, settling into her chair with practiced ease. "I see you're applying for our project coordination position. Tell me what interests you about this role." Marcus had rehearsed this moment countless times. He needed to sound competent enough to be taken seriously, but mediocre enough to avoid the demanding responsibilities that would steal his evenings with Emma. The salary was decent, the hours supposedly reasonable, and most importantly, it required no travel. "Well, I enjoy working with people and keeping projects organized," he replied, deliberately avoiding the technical language that came naturally to him. "I think I could do a good job helping teams stay on track." Sarah nodded, making notes on her tablet. Her eyes, however, lingered on his face with an intensity that made Marcus uncomfortable. She asked about his previous experience, and he carefully crafted responses that painted him as competent but unremarkable. When she inquired about his educational background, he mentioned his engineering degree but downplayed the advanced coursework and research that had once defined his identity. The questions grew more technical as Sarah probed deeper. She presented scenarios involving resource allocation and timeline management, problems that Marcus could solve in his sleep. Yet he forced himself to stumble through basic answers, pretending to think hard about concepts he had mastered years ago. "How would you handle a situation where multiple departments are competing for the same resources?" she asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. Marcus began formulating the sophisticated framework he had developed during his aerospace days, then caught himself. "Well, I suppose I would try to talk to everyone and see if we could work something out," he said instead, cringing internally at how naive he sounded. Throughout the charade, his mind kept drifting to Emma. Last night, she had asked him to help with her math homework, her tiny fingers struggling to hold the pencil correctly as she worked through addition problems. The pure concentration on her face had reminded him why he had walked away from his career in the first place. When his wife died 2 years ago, Emma had become his entire world. Sarah studied Marcus with the keen eye of someone who had spent years reading people. Something felt off about this candidate. His resume showed a solid engineering background, but there were gaps that didn't quite add up. The way he carried himself suggested confidence far beyond what his modest answers revealed. His vocabulary slipped occasionally into technical precision before he seemed to catch himself and retreat into simpler terms. She noticed other details too. His watch was expensive, the kind worn by executives rather than job seekers. His posture was impeccable, suggesting military training or at least extensive professional experience. Most telling were his hands, calloused not from manual labor but from precise work, the kind that required both strength and delicacy. When she asked about his availability for overtime and travel, Marcus brightened with what seemed like relief. "I prefer to keep regular hours," he said quickly. "Family commitments, you understand. I'm not really looking for anything too demanding." The response struck Sarah as odd. Most candidates emphasized their flexibility and willingness to go above and beyond. This man seemed almost eager to limit his responsibilities. She began to suspect that Marcus Chen was either severely underestimating his own abilities or deliberately hiding something significant. Meanwhile, 3 miles away at Sunshine Elementary, Emma Chen sat in her afternoon reading circle, glancing repeatedly at the classroom clock. Sarah decided to test her growing suspicions with a more challenging scenario. She pulled up a complex diagram on her tablet, showing an intricate project timeline with multiple dependencies and resource conflicts. "This is a situation we faced last quarter," she said, sliding the device across the table. "How would you approach resolving these bottlenecks?" Marcus glanced at the screen and immediately saw the solution. The critical path was obvious, requiring a simple resequencing of tasks and strategic resource reallocation. His mind automatically began calculating optimal workflows and risk mitigation strategies, the same analytical processes that had made him invaluable in aerospace development. Then he caught himself. This was exactly the kind of thinking that would reveal his true capabilities. He forced his expression to remain confused and uncertain. "Well, this looks pretty complicated," he said slowly, pretending to study the diagram more carefully. "I guess I would maybe ask someone more experienced for help." Sarah watched his face intently. For just a moment, she had seen something flash in his eyes, a spark of immediate understanding that contradicted his bumbling response. She was certain now that Marcus Chen was far more qualified than he was pretending to be. The question was why someone would deliberately undersell themselves in a job interview. In her 15 years of corporate experience, she had never encountered anything like this. People usually exaggerated their abilities, not concealed them. "Where in the world are you watching from right now?" she wondered silently as she observed this unusual candidate. "Have you ever had to hide your abilities for the sake of your family?" Just then, Marcus's phone buzzed softly on the table. The screen lit up with a text notification, and Sarah caught a glimpse of the contact name, Emma's School. Marcus's entire demeanor shifted instantly, his carefully constructed facade cracking as genuine concern flooded his features. "Excuse me," he said, his voice tight with worry. "This might be important." The message was simple but sent his heart racing. Emma fell on playground. Minor scrape on knee. "She's asking for daddy." "All okay, just wanted you to know." Relief washed over Marcus so powerfully that his shoulders sagged. Sarah noticed the transformation immediately. Gone was the uncertain job applicant, replaced by someone whose priorities were crystal clear. She watched as he typed back quickly, his fingers moving with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to handling crises. "Everything all right?" Sarah asked gently, recognizing the universal expression of parental concern. Marcus looked up, and for the first time in the interview, his guard completely dropped. "My daughter," he said simply. "She had a small accident at school, but she's fine. It's just that since her mother died, any call from school makes me..." He trailed off, realizing he had revealed more than intended. But something about Sarah's expression, a softness that hadn't been there before, encouraged him to continue. "She's 6, he said quietly. "And she's everything to me. Every decision I make, every choice about work or life, it all comes back to what's best for Emma. I know that might not sound very ambitious to someone in your position, but it's my reality. Sarah felt a shift in her understanding, but the interview had to continue. She moved to practical questions about salary expectations and availability, watching as Marcus seemed to retreat back into his deliberate mediocrity. When she mentioned the position occasionally required weekend work or late evening meetings, Marcus shook his head firmly. "I'm sorry, but evenings and weekends are reserved for my daughter. I pick her up from school at 3:30 every day, and that's non-negotiable." His tone carried an edge that hadn't been there before, a quiet steel that suggested this was where his flexibility ended. Sarah noted the change, filing it away with her other observations about this puzzling candidate. As for salary, Marcus continued, seeming to force himself back into character, "I'm not really looking for anything too high. Just enough to cover our basic needs. I don't need a lot of responsibility or stress." The words sounded hollow even as he spoke them. Sarah had interviewed hundreds of candidates, and she had never heard someone actively argue for lower pay and fewer responsibilities. Combined with everything else she had observed, it painted a picture that made no sense unless Marcus Chen was deliberately sabotaging his own prospects. She wrapped up the formal questions with a growing sense of frustration. This man was clearly hiding something significant, and she was determined to figure out what it was. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Chen," she said finally, closing her portfolio with what she hoped sounded like finality. "We'll be in touch within the week." Marcus gathered his briefcase with a mixture of relief and disappointment. He had accomplished exactly what he set out to do, ensuring he wouldn't be offered a position that would consume his evenings and weekends. Yet something about Sarah's perceptive questions had left him feeling exposed, as if she had seen through his careful performance. He stood and shook her hand, noting how her grip lingered just a moment longer than necessary. Her eyes held an expression he couldn't quite read, somewhere between confusion and determination. "Thank you for considering me," he said, meaning it more than she could know. "I hope you find the right person for the position." Marcus walked toward the conference room door, each step carrying him away from a job he didn't really want but somehow felt he was losing anyway. The elevator beckoned like an escape route, promising to carry him back to the simple world where his only responsibility was being Emma's father. Behind him, Sarah remained seated, staring at her notes with growing certainty that she had just interviewed the most qualified candidate to ever deliberately fail a job interview. Her instincts screamed that Marcus Chen was hiding expertise that could transform their entire department, but his desperate need to limit his responsibility suggested personal circumstances she didn't fully understand. As the conference room door closed behind Marcus, Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. She grabbed her phone and quickly typed a message to her assistant, canceling her next meeting. Then she stood up, smoothed her jacket, and headed for the door with purposeful strides. Whatever Marcus Chen was hiding, she was going to find out. The elevator doors were closing when Sarah's voice cut through the lobby's ambient noise. "Mr. Chen, wait please." Marcus turned, his finger still hovering over the ground floor button. Sarah approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting answers, but her expression held curiosity rather than confrontation. "That wasn't really you in there, was it?" she said without preamble, stopping just a few feet away. The careful underperformance, the deliberate simplification of complex problems, the almost desperate need to appear ordinary. "I've been conducting interviews for 15 years, and I've never seen anything quite like it." Marcus felt his carefully constructed walls crumbling. The perceptive woman standing before him had seen through every defense he had erected. His first instinct was to continue the charade, to maintain the fiction that he was simply an unremarkable candidate seeking modest employment. But something in Sarah's tone suggested she already knew the truth. "I researched you during the last 10 minutes of our interview," she continued, pulling out her phone. "Dr. Marcus Chen, MIT doctorate in aerospace engineering, 3 patents in propulsion systems, lead researcher on the Aurora project before it was classified. The man I just interviewed couldn't possibly be the same person who published groundbreaking research on hypersonic flight dynamics." Marcus's shoulders sagged in defeat. The weight of maintaining his deception had been heavier than he realized, and her words brought both relief and terror. If she knew his background, she would also understand how drastically overqualified he was for the position he had sought. "You're right," he said quietly. "That wasn't me in there. Or rather, it wasn't who I used to be." Sarah gestured toward the lobby's seating area, her expression softening from confrontation to genuine interest. "There's a coffee shop downstairs. Would you be willing to have an honest conversation? I think I understand why you did what you did, but I'd like to hear it from you." Marcus glanced at his watch. He had 40 minutes before Emma's school pickup, enough time for the explanation he realized Sarah deserved. They settled into comfortable chairs with steaming cups between them, the corporate bustle fading into background noise. "When my wife died 2 years ago," Marcus began, his voice steady but weighted with grief, "everything changed overnight. Emma was 4, barely understanding why mommy wasn't coming home. I was working 80-hour weeks, traveling constantly, living for the next breakthrough or patent filing." He paused, stirring his coffee absently as memories surfaced. "The night Lisa died, I was in a conference room in Houston, arguing with engineers about fuel efficiency calculations. Emma was at daycare until almost 7 because I was too important to leave a meeting. My daughter spent her mother's last day with strangers because her father was chasing professional glory." Sarah listened without interruption, recognizing the raw honesty of someone finally sharing a burden they had carried alone. She thought of her own 80-year-old son and the delicate balance she struggled to maintain between career advancement and motherhood. "I walked away from everything," Marcus continued. "The research position, the consulting offers, the patents that could have made us wealthy. None of it mattered compared to being the parent Emma needed. But raising a child on savings doesn't last forever. I need work, just not the kind that will steal what's left of her childhood." "What do you think Sarah figured out?" she wondered silently. "Share your thoughts about what happens next." Sarah leaned forward, her executive composure giving way to something more personal. "I understand more than you might think," she said softly. "I'm a single mother too. My son is 8, and his father decided that fatherhood wasn't the adventure he'd signed up for. I've spent years trying to prove I could excel professionally while being the parent he deserves." Marcus looked up, surprised by this revelation. The powerful executive across from him suddenly seemed more human, more relatable than he had imagined possible. "The difference is," Sarah continued, "I had the luxury of building my career before becoming a single parent. You had to choose between professional success and being present for Emma during the most crucial time in her life. That takes a kind of courage most people never have to discover." She pulled out her tablet and began scrolling through files. "What if I told you there was another way? We have a new consulting division that handles specialized projects for aerospace clients. The work is complex, intellectually challenging, and perfectly suited for someone with your background. But here's the key part, it's completely flexible." Marcus felt a spark of hope but forced himself to remain cautious. "What does flexible mean exactly?" "Work from home most days, travel only when absolutely necessary and never overnight without weeks of advance notice. Set your own hours as long as deadlines are met. Emma could even visit the office during school breaks. We have other parents on the team who understand that sometimes soccer games and parent-teacher conferences take priority." Sarah's voice carried genuine enthusiasm now, as if she had solved a puzzle that had been bothering her for months. "If this story has touched your heart, let us know where you're listening from and what resonates most with your own experience." Marcus stared at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. A position that would utilize his expertise while respecting his commitment to Emma seemed too good to be true. Yet Sarah's expression held nothing but sincerity and understanding. "The salary would be significantly higher than the coordinator position," she continued, "but more importantly, you'd be working with people who understand that being a great parent makes you a better professional, not a liability. Our team includes 2 other single parents and several people who prioritize family time above corporate ladder climbing." 3 months later, Marcus sat in his home office, reviewing propulsion calculations for a next-generation aircraft design while Emma worked on her homework at the small desk he had set up nearby. The work challenged him intellectually in ways he had forgotten were possible, yet he had been present for every school pickup, every bedtime story, every scraped knee since accepting Sarah's offer. The transformation had extended beyond professional satisfaction. Emma now spoke proudly of her daddy who helped design airplanes, and Marcus had rediscovered the joy of using his mind for complex problem-solving. The guilt that had shadowed him since Lisa's death had gradually lifted, replaced by the understanding that he could honor both his wife's memory and his daughter's needs. Sarah had become more than a supervisor, she had become a mentor and friend who understood the unique challenges of single parenthood. Their coffee meetings had evolved into collaborative sessions where they discussed not just project timelines but parenting strategies and work-life balance. As Emma finished her math problems and climbed into his lap for their evening reading ritual, Marcus reflected on the unexpected path that had led them here. Sometimes the greatest success came not from chasing traditional definitions of achievement, but from having the courage to define success on your own terms.